a billionaire father with everything money could buy. Yet in one brutal moment, he broke his own son's spirit. What happened next inside a forgotten classroom shattered his empire and changed his legacy forever. The sound of silence inside that cramped after-school classroom was deafening, heavier than the weight of all the skyscrapers William Grant owned. The walls were yellowed with age, the wooden desks scarred with countless scratches from restless hands, and the light bulb above flickered as if reluctant to stay alive. Yet nothing drew as much attention as the towering figure at the back of the room. William Grant himself, the infamous real estate magnate, the man whose name adorned glass towers across the city. But here, stripped of the boardrooms and cameras, he stood red-faced, fists clenched, voice sharp enough to slice the air. "Read it again," he barked. His voice carried the kind of authority that could silence a board meeting filled with lawyers and investors. But tonight it was directed at his 8-year-old son, David. The boy's hands trembled as they clutched the slim reading book. The words on the page blurred together, letters twisting and reshaping themselves into cruel hieroglyphs he couldn't decipher. His lips quivered, his tongue stumbled, and every syllable came out broken, hesitant, wrong. The more he struggled, the heavier the tension grew, until the children around him sat frozen, afraid even to breathe. "Why can't you get it right?" William's voice cracked like a whip. The man who negotiated billion-dollar deals could not comprehend why his own son couldn't read a simple sentence. His impatience boiled over, his face twisted in anger. "You're embarrassing yourself." Again, the book slipped in David's hands. His eyes filled, his chest rose and fell with short gasps. Then the inevitable hot tears spilled down his cheeks, dripping onto the page. A sob broke free, raw and aching, echoing through the small classroom. The room turned to ice. No child dared move. The teacher's chair sat empty, the air pressed down thick, and in that moment, William's wealth, power, and reputation all shrank into something pitiful. A father unable to help his own son. He stood there, towering yet powerless, watching his boy unravel under the weight of expectations too heavy for his small shoulders. The scene was brutal, almost unbearable. For the children in the room, it was a memory seared into their minds. For David, it was humiliation carved deep into his young heart. And for William, though he didn't yet know it, this was the moment that would shatter his illusions of control and open the door to the most unexpected teacher of his life. This was not a boardroom where numbers obeyed formulas. This was not a contract where signatures forced compliance. This was his boy breaking under the strain of a father's pride and impatience. The skyscrapers William built could scrape the sky, but in this suffocating silence, his empire meant nothing. Here, in a forgotten classroom that smelled of chalk dust and ink, the real test of his legacy was unfolding, and he was failing. What happens next is not what William Grant, or anyone in that room, could have predicted. Because into this storm of authority and helplessness would step a figure so ordinary, so easily dismissed, that he should have been invisible. Yet what this figure would do in the next few moments would leave even the mighty William Grant speechless. And from that silence, a new kind of power, patient, quiet, unshakable, would rise. This is not a story about money. This is not a story about skyscrapers or contracts. This is the story of a father brought to his knees by the very lesson he had long forgotten. And it all began with a boy, a book, and tears no empire could stop. If this story already touches your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support is what keeps us going, what inspires us to create more stories that might just change the way you see the world. Now, let me leave you with a question, one that may feel simple, but carries the weight of everything you just heard. If you were David's father in that room, what would you do? A. Push him harder. Demand he try again until he gets it right. B. Stop, take a breath, and give him the space to find his own rhythm. Write your answer or be in the comments. The silence after David's sobs lingered like a heavy fog, and for a long moment it seemed no one dared to break it. Then the door creaked softly, and a figure stepped into the room. He was not imposing, not dressed in expensive fabrics, or carrying the air of power. He was thin, his posture slightly stooped with age, his grey hair combed back in a way that showed both care and poverty. His shirt was pressed but frayed at the collar, and the shoes on his feet had been polished so many times the leather had lost its shine. This was Mr. Thomas Reed, the teacher who had spent more than 3 decades in classrooms no one celebrated, nurturing children who came and went, most of whom never remembered his name after leaving, yet in this moment, as his quiet steps crossed the floor, it was as if the entire weight of the room shifted toward him. Without raising his voice, without commanding authority, he laid a gentle hand on the boy's desk and then turned to the furious father. "Mr. Grant," he said, his voice steady, neither defiant nor submissive, "would you take a seat? Allow me a moment with your son." William Grant, unaccustomed to being spoken to in such a manner, opened his mouth to object, but there was something in Reed's tone, not arrogance, not challenge, but the certainty of a man who had seen too many children falter under pressure, that forced him into silence. Slowly, stiffly, William lowered himself into a chair at the back of the classroom. For the first time in his adult life, he felt like the student. Thomas Reed knelt beside David so that his eyes were level with the boy's tear-streaked face. His voice softened, wrapping itself around the fragile silence like a warm blanket. "Shall we try again, David? Just one word at a time. We don't need to conquer the whole sentence today. One word will do," the boy sniffled, still trembling, but something in the gentleness of that voice calmed him. He hesitated, then opened the book again. His finger traced a single word, his lips moved, and the sound came out uneven but audible. Reed smiled, a small, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Good. That was strong. Now let's see the next one." The other children, who had been paralyzed with fear, began to lean forward, watching with tentative hope. The atmosphere shifted not dramatically, but perceptibly. The tension in the air loosened, as if the invisible grip of William's anger had been replaced by something softer, more forgiving. "Excellent. David, you see, that was 2 words. To more than before. Let's build a little tower of words, one brick at a time." The boy managed a weak laugh through his tears, surprised by his own success. Reed tapped the book lightly. "This page doesn't scare you. You're stronger than these words. They only win if you give up, and I see no boy ready to give up here." By the time David finished the first line, the room was transformed. Where moments earlier there had been humiliation, now there was pride glowing faintly in the boy's cheeks. He looked up at his teacher with a hesitant smile, as if asking permission to believe in himself. Reed nodded, eyes shining. "There it is. The first line. And it belongs to you." At the back of the room, William sat frozen. He had paid tutors from prestigious academies, specialists with impressive resumes, and yet none of them had coaxed such a result from his son. They had come armed with techniques, charts, and promises, but none had carried the quiet power of this old man. With his tired hands and gentle patience, it struck William. With a kind of violence, that patience, something he had always regarded as weakness, was in fact the greatest strength. He had built towers of steel and glass, commanding armies of workers, dictating every detail. But here, in a dusty classroom, his authority crumbled before the strength of a man who needed no wealth, no status, only belief in the child before him. Reed's words cut through the stillness once more, directed at David but loud enough for William to hear. "Learning isn't about speed, and it isn't about fear. It's about finding your rhythm. Everyone has a rhythm. David, yours is waiting for you, and I am here until you find it." The boy beamed as he managed to finish the entire sentence on the page. His classmates, who had been silent witnesses, began clapping softly, almost instinctively, not because the sentence was perfect, but because they recognized courage when they saw it, and in that fragile applause, William Grant felt a foreign sensation stir within him, something close to shame, but heavier, deeper. He had mistaken power for love, control for guidance. Now, watching his son glow with triumph under the care of a man society ignored, he felt the ground beneath his certainty begin to shift. Thomas Reed stood, brushing dust from his trousers, and looked directly at William. The glance was not accusatory, not triumphant, merely steady. It said without words, "This is what your son needed. This is what you could not give him." William's jaw tightened. For the first time, he realized that the empire he had built had left him powerless in the one place that mattered most, the heart of his child. And the man who held the key was not a tycoon, not a politician, but a teacher with worn shoes and an unshakable patience. The classroom exhaled as if relieved, and the ordinary moment settled into something extraordinary. In the quiet victory of a boy's first full sentence, a seed had been planted, one that would soon grow into a lesson no wealth could buy and no skyscraper could contain. William Grant sat motionless at the back of the room, his eyes fixed on the boy who just minutes earlier had been crushed under the weight of failure. Now David's cheeks glowed, his lips curved into the faintest smile, and his small chest rose with pride as he repeated the words on the page with growing confidence. The contrast was almost unbearable. It was as if the child before him had been reborn, lifted from despair into possibility. And the one who had performed this quiet miracle was not him, not the father with all the money and power in the world, but a weary schoolteacher who earned less in a month than William spent on a single dinner. Something inside William cracked. His mind raced through excuses, through rationalizations, but none held. How could this old man, dressed in threadbare clothes, wield a power William could not touch? How could his gentle patience accomplish in moments what William's authority, his tutors, his resources had failed to deliver in years? The answer came not in explanation, but in a single sentence, spoken by Thomas Reed with the calm certainty of someone who knew its truth would outlast any fortune. "Children do not need someone to do the work for them," Reed said softly, though every ear in the classroom caught the words. "They only need someone willing to believe in them and to wait." The words fell into William's chest like stones dropping into deep water. For a man who had built his empire on speed, on deadlines, on the ruthless belief that time was money, the idea of waiting felt foreign, almost offensive. Yet as he watched his son glow with newfound confidence, the sharpness of that truth cut through his defenses. For years he had driven himself forward by force, bulldozing obstacles, commanding employees, crushing competitors. And now he realized with a painful clarity that he had been applying the same brutal philosophy to his own child. He had believed that pressure would produce diamonds, that discipline would carve perfection, that a father's love meant demanding the best at any cost. But what he saw before him was not a diamond. It was a fragile boy who needed space to grow at his own pace. And William had been suffocating him with the weight of impossible expectations. He felt shame rise in his throat, burning like fire. He remembered the faces of his rivals in the boardroom, how they had once accused him of being ruthless, unyielding, incapable of compassion. He had worn those accusations like armor, proof of his strength. But here, in the eyes of his son, that armor was revealed for what it truly was: a cage. And cages, no matter how gilded, could never nurture life. William's gaze shifted back to Thomas Reed, who now stood quietly, his hands folded behind his back, watching David as though he were the most important boy in the world. There was no pride in Reed's expression, no smugness, only the calm satisfaction of a man who had spent a lifetime believing in children who had no one else to believe in them. How many times had this teacher worked late into the night grading papers for little pay? How many times had he bent down to meet a child's fearful eyes, whispering encouragement when no one else would? William thought of the towering buildings with his name etched in marble, monuments to his ambition, and he wondered, in the end, which legacy would endure: the cold shadow of his skyscrapers, or the quiet warmth of this teacher's influence. The thought unsettled him. He had always measured worth in numbers, profits, square footage, deals closed. But here was a man who measured worth in something invisible, intangible, immeasurable, and yet more powerful than anything William had ever known. Belief. David turned to look at his father, his eyes shining with hope, as if seeking approval. William wanted to smile, to clap, to say he was proud, but the words caught in his throat. Pride was foreign to him when it was not tied to victory, to achievement, to conquest. And yet, for the first time, he felt the raw, unfiltered desire simply to let his son know he was enough. Reed's voice interrupted his spiraling thoughts. He did not speak loudly, but the weight of his words carried across the room. "Mr. Grant, children are not contracts to be signed. They are not buildings to be completed on schedule. They are seeds, and seeds do not grow because you command them to. They grow because you give them time, patience, and light." The sentence struck William harder than any insult ever could. It dismantled him. Seeds, patience, light. These were currencies he had never invested in. He had poured his fortune into glass towers, but never into the fragile soil of his own child's heart. The room around him blurred, as though his empire, his reputation, his wealth, all of it were slipping from his grasp. But in the blur, one image remained sharp: David, smiling through drying tears, proud of a single sentence read aloud. For William, it was both the smallest and the greatest victory he had ever witnessed. He lowered his gaze, ashamed and humbled, and for the first time in years, he felt the urge not to command, but to learn. He realized that in this classroom, the teacher was not merely guiding a child. He was teaching a father who had forgotten what it meant to nurture, to wait, to believe. And in that moment, William Grant, the man who ruled over glass towers, understood that his empire was nothing compared to the fragile, unmeasured, invaluable gift his son had just been given. A gift he himself had never thought to give: the freedom to stumble, the dignity to try, and the strength to lead at his own pace. That night, William Grant did not sleep. The house was silent, its halls wide and echoing, filled with all the luxuries money could buy, but none of the warmth he suddenly realized he lacked. He wandered through the rooms as if seeing them for the first time: the polished marble floors, the chandeliers imported from Europe, the endless rows of glass windows looking out over the city skyline. They had once been his pride, physical proof of the empire he had built. Now they felt hollow, like mirrors reflecting back a man he was no longer sure he wanted to see. He stopped at the doorway of his son's room. David lay curled beneath a blanket, his face relaxed, the tension of the day washed away in sleep. His small chest rose and fell rhythmically, and one arm still draped across the book he had struggled with earlier. A faint smile lingered on his lips, as if even in dreams he carried the victory of reading his first full sentence. William stood there, unable to move. For years, he had treated bedtime as an afterthought, something left to nannies and housekeepers. Tonight, he could not take his eyes off the boy. He tried to remember the last time he had simply watched his son sleep, and the truth cut into him: he couldn't. Somewhere between acquisitions, negotiations, and the relentless chase for profit, he had abandoned these quiet moments that built the fabric of fatherhood. As he leaned against the doorframe, a memory surfaced, unbidden, sharp and vivid. He was no older than David is now, sitting at a wooden desk in a one-room schoolhouse miles away from the glittering city. His clothes were patched, his shoes worn through at the soles, but his hands trembled with the same fear David had shown earlier: fear of failure, fear of words that refused to come alive on the page. He remembered the sting of tears in his own eyes, the shame of being left behind, and he remembered the man who had saved him. Not a billionaire, not a man with skyscrapers, but an old village teacher who had refused to let him drown in that shame. Patiently, day after day, the teacher had guided him through the world of letters, never shouting, never belittling, only believing. "You will build something one day," the man had said. "Not with your fists, but with your mind." William felt his throat tighten. That teacher was long gone now, his name barely remembered outside of faded records, but without him William Grant would have been nothing more than another boy lost to poverty. It was this forgotten man's patience that had laid the foundation for everything William had achieved. And now, watching his son breathe evenly in sleep, he realized he had become the very thing his teacher had protected him from: a voice of harshness, of pressure, of cruelty disguised as discipline. The empire he had built suddenly seemed fragile. Towers of steel and glass meant little if the boy who bore his name grew up broken, stripped of confidence. He had built his life on the assumption that wealth could shield him from emptiness. Tonight, he saw the truth. Wealth without wisdom, without love, without the willingness to nurture, was emptiness itself. He entered the room quietly and picked up the book from beside David. The simple sentences, the childish illustrations, were a world away from the contracts and architectural blueprints that consumed his life. Yet in this small, humble text lay the future of his son, and perhaps his own redemption. He closed the book carefully and placed it on the desk, his hand lingering on its worn cover. The thought would not leave him. What legacy did he truly want to leave behind? Towers that might crumble in decades, or something more enduring, something invisible but unbreakable: knowledge, patience, the belief in a child's potential. His own childhood teacher had planted that seed in him, and it had grown into fortune. But he had mistaken the fruit for the root. Now he saw that the real gift was not wealth, but the light of learning. A wave of resolve settled over him. He could not erase the impatience, the cruelty of his outburst, but he could choose what came next. He could decide that from this night forward, his wealth would serve more than his pride. It would serve the children who, like him once, were desperate for someone to believe in them. It would serve his son, who deserved a father willing not just to provide, but to wake. William sat at the edge of the bed and, for the first time in years, brushed a hand gently across his son's hair. The boy stirred, sighed, and settled again. William whispered into the quiet room, though he knew David could not hear. "I won't fail you again." In that whispered promise, something shifted inside him. It was not dramatic, not the kind of transformation that made headlines, but a subtle, profound turning. The man who had built empires realized that the greatest structure he could ever raise was not made of steel or stone, but of trust, patience, and love. And though the city outside glittered with towers bearing his name, he knew that if he could not give this to his son, those towers meant nothing. He left the room quietly. But he carried with him a memory of his childhood teacher and the image of his son's smile. Between those two, he saw a bridge that connected past and future, failure and redemption. It was a bridge he was finally ready to cross. And in his heart, he knew, wealth might build monuments, but only patience builds men. Morning light spilled across the city skyline, reflecting off towers of glass that bore William Grant's name. For decades, these buildings had been his monuments, proof of dominance, symbols of victory. But now, as he stood before a crowd of reporters, community leaders, and children in worn jackets clutching library cards with nervous pride, he realized something extraordinary. For the first time in his life, he was unveiling not a skyscraper, not a luxury development, but a promise that bore another man's name. The sign draped in velvet was pulled away, and the words gleamed in gold letters, Thomas Reed Library. The crowd erupted in applause, though the man for whom it was named stood quietly at the edge, his thin frame dwarfed by the grandeur of the moment. Reed's eyes, weary but sharp, flicked to William for only a second, and in that glance was an unspoken truth. This wasn't about pride or redemption. It was about children like David, children who deserved a chance to step into the light of knowledge without the shadow of fear. William's voice trembled as he began to speak. Not from nerves, he had addressed senators, bankers, entire boards of investors without faltering, but from something far more dangerous to a man like him: sincerity. For many years, he began, I believed that building higher, faster, and stronger was the measure of success. I thought wealth and ambition could fill every void. But I was wrong. He paused, his eyes falling on David in the front row, clutching a book to his chest with the pride of a conqueror. Success without patience is an empty shell. Wealth without wisdom is poverty disguised in glass and steel. A teacher once saved me with patience, and recently I watched him save my son. It is to him, and to every teacher who refuses to give up on a child, that I dedicate this library. The cameras flashed, but William did not flinch. He no longer needed to control the narrative. He only needed to speak the truth. A poor teacher taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that patience is richer than money, and knowledge is the most enduring fortress we can build. This library is only the beginning. It will be followed by others across this city until every child who longs for learning has a place to belong. A murmur of awe rippled through the crowd. For years, William had been seen as a ruthless magnate, a man who would sacrifice anything for profit. But here he was, offering not another investment opportunity, but a vision rooted in something humbler, nobler. The doors opened, and children surged forward, their laughter ringing out as they explored aisles of books arranged not by prestige, but by the joy of discovery. Some reached timidly for picture books, others for novels, their eyes widening as though they had stumbled into a palace. For them, it was. David slipped inside among them, his earlier struggles forgotten, his voice eager as he began reading aloud to another boy who stumbled over the words. William watched in silence, his heart tightening. This was legacy, not the buildings, not the headlines. This, his son passing on what he had just begun to learn, was the true inheritance he wanted to leave behind. Later, when the reporters pressed him with questions, William answered with a candor that stunned them. Do not mistake this for charity. This is responsibility. Wealth demands more than monuments. It demands we invest in people. If my empire crumbles tomorrow, let it be said I left behind not towers of glass, but towers of books that children could climb toward their own futures. The words spread quickly, quoted in newspapers and broadcast across television screens. But the man himself was less concerned with how he sounded and more with how he felt, lighter, freer, no longer bound by the illusion that control was love. He knew now that love was waiting, guiding, and believing even when progress came slowly. One word, one step at a time. As the ceremony ended, William found Thomas Reed standing quietly apart, watching the children scatter through the halls. William approached, unsure of what to say. He was a man used to negotiating deals, not offering gratitude. But the words came anyway. "I built this city with steel," he admitted, his voice low, "but you taught me that building a child requires something I never had: patience. You changed my son's life, and you changed mine." Reed's reply was simple. "I didn't change him. He already had it within him. All he needed was time." William nodded, humbled once again. That was the essence of it all. Every child carried potential like a seed. Money could not command it to sprout, power could not force it to bloom. Only time, patience, and faith could coax it into life. As the sun dipped lower, the sound of children's laughter spilled out of the library and into the street, mingling with the city's endless hum. William turned to watch his son once more, surrounded by other children, a book open in his lap, his face radiant with possibility. And in that moment, William Grant, once the most feared and respected man in real estate, understood the simple truth that would redefine him forever. Wealth may build walls, but only patience tears them down. Glass towers may scrape the sky, but only knowledge reaches the soul. And if he could leave this city with one enduring gift, it would not be a skyline. It would be a generation of children who knew that no word was beyond their reach, no dream beyond their grasp. That night, the city glowed as always, but for William, the brightest light came not from the skyline, but from within a small library bearing the name of a humble teacher who had taught him the most profound lesson of his life. There are stories that stay with us not because they dazzle with grandeur, but because they cut straight into the heart with a truth we too often overlook. The story of William Grant, his son David, and the humble teacher Thomas Reed is one of those stories. It reminds us that the true measure of success is not found in towering buildings or vast fortunes, but in the quieter, harder work of nurturing human potential. William spent decades building an empire, but only in the moment he saw his son read a single line, helped not by wealth or status, but by the steady patience of a teacher, did he confront the emptiness at the center of his life. The skyscrapers meant nothing if his son grew up in fear. The fortune meant little if it could not provide the one thing every child needs: someone willing to believe in them. The transformation William experienced did not come from power or deals, but from humility, the recognition that he had failed to give his son space to grow, and that it was never too late to change. By building libraries and honoring Thomas Reed, William discovered a new kind of legacy, one that would outlast him, not because his name was carved into stone, but because countless children would find courage in the pages of books. Just as David had, the lesson is clear, and it is timeless. Patience is not weakness, it is strength. Believing in someone when they cannot yet believe in themselves is one of the most powerful gifts we can offer. In our fast-paced world, where results are demanded instantly and success is measured in numbers, this story is a call to slow down, to listen, to wait. Whether you are a parent, a leader, a teacher, or simply a friend, remember that the people around you are not projects to be completed on schedule. They are seeds, and seeds need time. Give them that time. Create the conditions for growth. And most importantly, trust that within them lies the strength to rise. If we carry this lesson into our daily lives, everything changes. Instead of pressuring others, we encourage. Instead of rushing outcomes, we nurture journeys. And in doing so, we discover that our greatest legacy is not what we build for ourselves, but what we inspire in others. Now let me ask you a simple question. If someone close to you was struggling, what would you choose to give them first? Of pressure to do better, or be patience and encouragement to try again? Please share your answer, or B, in the comments below so everyone can reflect together. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support is what gives us the motivation to keep creating meaningful stories like this for you.